Ichigo is a member of every single race in Bleach, so why does he only use Getsuga Tensho? This is in no way a new idea, and if you've been in the Bleach community for pretty much any amount of time, you might have seen a Getsuga Tensho meme here or there. And for the most part, that's all it really is. We just really love to meme it. But for another part of the Bleach community, it's more than that. They believe Ichigo having only one technique despite being a member of every single race in the Bleach universe is one of the story's many shortcomings. And I have to be honest, I think they're right. See, battle shonen protagonists are expected to grow not only as people, but also as fighters. How they fight, what they fight with, and sometimes their very philosophy in fighting itself is supposed to grow and evolve with them as the story progresses. I mean, it's literally a staple of the industry at the moment. And overall, I think this point is pretty fine. Or at least it would be, if we weren't talking about Bleach. The problem here isn't actually the idea itself. Like I just said, it's perfectly fine, but rather it's how years of repetition have changed this from being just a really cool shonen trope and turned it into something more of an immutable law. Meaning that it's automatically assumed that whichever battle shonen falls short of this ideal has definitely failed in one way or the other, even if that fictional universe's laws and mechanics completely justify it. Let's imagine. What if there was a fictional universe where training and hard work weren't all it took to learn new techniques? What if creativity alone wasn't the answer either? What if you could train for billions of years and become the most skilled and experienced fighter in the whole damn universe, and none of that skill or experience would be reflected on your moveset? So what would we do as an audience in such a situation? Should we criticize the author for not knowing how the world he created is supposed to work? Or should we as an audience judge that world based specifically off of how well it's capable of adhering to that rule it has created and be able to tell a compelling story while doing so? Or actually, I don't know. I wasn't going anywhere with that. Why would you think I was going anywhere with that? Anyway, back to the video. And at this point, I'm pretty certain most of you expert kubologists have figured out where this is going. So let's get right into it. Why does Ichigo have only one technique? And why does it not fall under the umbrella of bad writing, even despite his being a member of every single race in the universe? Before I can do this, I'll first have to prove that Bleach as a universe functions on a completely different set of principles when you compare it to other shonen, and I'll first have to prove that those rules and principles actually exist. And to do this, we're going to have to take a look at 3 different shinigami, each of these 3 representing the 3 generations of shinigami that we're introduced to throughout the story. First being Genryusai Shigekuni Yamamoto, representing the first generation of shinigami. Both he and Unohana are the only 2 living first-gen shinigami, and considering that he has far more screen time than her, we're going to use him to represent them. And followed by the current or second generation of shinigami, which will be represented by Shunsui Kyoraku, since he also gets far more screen time than Toshiro. And finally, Toshiro Hitsugaya, representing the third or new generation of shinigami that we're introduced to in the story, since he also gets far more screen time than any new gen shinigami. The first of these 3 we're going to look at is Toshiro Hitsugaya, the captain of Squad 10, a child prodigy who was stated to have acquired both Shikai and Bankai even before joining the Gotei 13. And just to explain how incredibly insane that is, when he was just another soul and Rokon guy living with his grandma, Momo, Renji, Izuru, Kira, and Shuhei, who was a senior at the time, were all students of the Shinore Jutsuing, and neither of them had learned even Shikai at the time. Which means that Toshiro entered the academy most likely after they had graduated or had become seniors. He then proceeded to graduate early, most likely in the same amount of time as Gin, and in that same time achieved both Shikai and Bankai, resulting in his becoming the 3rd seat of Squad 10, most likely before Izuru, Shuhei, Renji, and Momo were even seated officers, so you know this man is built different. And unlike a certain orange-haired protagonist who will not be named, Toshiro has a ton of moves, from Hyurin basic Ice Dragons to Shinku no Kori no Yaiba, Duncho Tsurara, Zanhyo Ningyo, Sennen Hyoro, Kyoten Hyakaso and Tenso Jurin, which just allows him to control the weather and opens up a ton of new moves for him to use. And honestly, this man just has way too many moves for me to name. So what else do we know about him? Well, we also know that he started interacting with his zanpakuto long before he even gained an Asauchi, and he started building his relationship with it way back, which will later on explain why he ended up unlocking both Bankai and Shikai so early, and we get a pretty straightforward confirmation of how strong this relationship is. In the 1,000-Year Blood War, spoilers, Toshiro and a number of other captains have their Bankai stolen by the Stern Ritter, and he's shown to be quite distressed by the fact that he can't hear Hyurin voice anymore, and when he does regain it, he seems equally relieved that he could hear him again, which clearly implies that they have quite the relationship with each other. And from this, we can make two different conclusions. 1. Toshiro has a ton of techniques. And 2. Toshiro has a really strong relationship with his zanpakuto. And it's also stated that in 100 years, it's likely that he might even surpass this guy. Our second character, Shunsui Jiro Sugurasuke Kyoraku. And man, there's a lot to unpack about this guy. So when it comes to power, to be honest, it's much easier to ask what his zanpakuto can't do than what it can do. Because Katen Kyokotsu, his zanpakuto, allows him to make children's games reality. Which sounds fairly simple until you realize he has games like Yubikiri, which punishes his opponent for lying. Lie once and your fingers go numb. Lie twice, all your bones get crushed. Lie 3 times, you get assaulted by excruciating pain indefinitely. And you might be thinking, hey, being the natural enemy of every politician in the universe is a pretty cool power, but no, there's more. And he has other games like Bushogoma, which allows him to create whirlwinds, Kageoni, which allows him to manipulate shadows, Takaoni basically guarantees whoever gets on top wins. Ignoring how poorly worded that was, let's also remember that he has way more games than we've actually seen, and that there's actually way more that he can do, and no, I'm not even going to touch his Bankai. The point is, he has a ton of techniques. And what else do we know about him? Well, he seems to have quite the interesting relationship with his zanpakuto spirit, Katen, who he's nicknamed Ohana. They seem to share quite the storied history with each other, and like a couple of lovers, have sworn to stay together and die together, for better or for worse. And heck, they seem to have such a deep and personal relationship that Ohana would get upset if he were to use Yubikiri because she hates him making pinky promises with other people. And considering the fact that both he and Jushiro were the first 2 students of the Shinore Jutsuing, which was established 2,100 years ago, it'd be safe to assume that he's had a relationship with Ohana for at least 2,000 years. That's a really long time, considering the fact that he's able to still function quite perfectly as the current head captain of the Gotei 13, while having one of the most finicky, most annoying, most incredibly insufferable dummy mommy that I want to step on me. Oh my god, I can't believe I just said that. No, but seriously, she's incredibly difficult to work with. She limits the number of techniques that Shunsui can use whenever she feels like it, prevents him from being able to manifest sets in games, and overall just dictates how the fight should go however she wants. You'd think that having to fight under such restrictive conditions would make him less of a fighter, but no, that's nowhere near the case. He's one of the most powerful characters in the entire series, and it's specifically because of this. You see, the dysfunctionality of his relationship with Ohana contributes to the ability to fight together in a really insane way. Because he isn't in control of how many techniques he can use, his opponents can't even predict what he wants to do, which makes the two of them a very dominant duo, and could only be a result of a long time of grueling hard work to try to learn to work with each other. And considering how long they've been together, it makes perfect sense that this happens. And so in conclusion, we can also say that Shunsui has a lot of techniques, and he also has a really strong relationship with his zanpakuto. This video is going on for way too long, but I promise you it's going somewhere. Some of you have already figured it out, but I promise you, it's going to be worth it in the end. And of all the characters in Bleach, I couldn't think of a better successor to our third and final character, Genryusai Shigekuni Yamamoto. And to be honest, I don't think I could give this Giga Chad enough of an intro. And to be honest, he's a pretty simple guy. You see, he likes to burn things in style. His zanpakuto Yujinjaka allows him to use techniques like Totsumi Nadegiri, which basically slices his opponents in half with fire. Jokakuenjo, which creates a massive wall of, well, fire and traps his opponents inside it. And then Taimatsu, which shoots a massive torrent of, you guessed it, fire, which burns his opponent. And then there's Enetsu Jigoku, which is capable of creating pillars of flames that trap his opponent and are capable of burning everyone and himself. Yeah, and we're probably also skipping his Bankai because I don't want this video to get way too long. So what else do we know about him? Well, when it comes to his zanpakuto, we don't really get to see him interact with it. But the only thing we can do is make an assumption that he does have an extremely strong relationship with it because he's had it for at least 2,100 years, about as old as Shinore Jutsuing Academy itself. Meaning that he's had an incredibly long amount of time, to the point that he's grown his relationship with it so much that his Bankai itself actually evolved from a different state 1,000 years ago and functions completely differently than it did those 1,000 years ago. So, in conclusion, I think we can say that he does have a very strong relationship with his zanpakuto, even though we never see them interacting. It's something that we can infer from the information that we know about him. Meaning that we can finally conclude that Yamamoto has a strong relationship with his zanpakuto and also has a ton of techniques that he can use. And with that said, we're finally at the main point of the video. Yay! Can only imagine how many of you have clicked off already. But we're talking about Ichigo now, because Ichigo has a ton of stuff that needs to be talked about. So he isn't like any of these last three characters. He's neither anywhere near as experienced, nor does he make up for it with his relationship with his zanpakuto. Actually, now that I think of it, Ichigo's relationship with his zanpakuto is far weirder than any Shinigami zanpakuto relationship in the entire series. Seriously. Also, we're about to enter very spoiler-heavy territory at this point, so if you haven't read the 1,000-Year Blood War, you might not want to hear any of these things. We good? Okay. So, there's certain points in the story where it looks like everything's fine, where it looks like Ichigo's actually making progress in building a relationship with Zangetsu. There's moments where they work together, there's moments where Ichigo makes mental notes to try to do more with Zangetsu, to try to get to know him more and all of that, and it sounds really great. But there's one teeny tiny problem, and the problem is that this guy isn't Zangetsu. It's actually this guy. And unlike an actual zanpakuto spirit, he does the complete opposite of what a zanpakuto spirit is supposed to do. Instead of supplementing and supporting Ichigo's power growth, he actually stifles it. He prevents Ichigo's power growth because he interprets Ichigo's desire to do battle and save others as a one-way trip to suffering and despair. And because of this, he suppresses Ichigo's true powers, meaning that Ichigo cannot grow in any meaningful way. And then there's the other guy, White Zangetsu, the actual Zangetsu, who, unlike Old Man Zangetsu, is very willing to teach Ichigo how to fight. Like, he actively tries to show Ichigo how to use the multiple sources of power that he has more efficiently. The problem here is that he talks like he's the love child of 4chan and Reddit. And because of that, Ichigo wants absolutely nothing to do with him. This conflict in motives is what creates the cycle. With Ichigo wanting the power to protect those he loves, he relies on Old Man Zangetsu, who in actuality does not want to give Ichigo more power because he interprets Ichigo's desire to fight, being manifested by White Zangetsu, as a one-way trip to despair and suffering. And so because of that, he suppresses Ichigo's true power, being White Zangetsu. White Zangetsu, on the other hand, is extremely willing to teach Ichigo how to get better. But unfortunately, he has no social skills whatsoever. This is mainly due to his nature as a hollow, and also his own way of trying to express his desire to protect Ichigo. Because of this, Ichigo is incapable of connecting with him. Ichigo's scared of him, which results in Ichigo relying on Old Man Zangetsu. This This is the core of the problem. This three-way deadlock that exists between these three beings is exactly what prevents them from truly connecting with each other. Because of that, there is no room for growth. You can't grow or evolve a relationship that does not exist to begin with. Because a relationship built on lies and misunderstandings might as well not even exist. This is why, despite learning how to holofy, Ichigo never learns to shoot Zeros. He's never seen doing that, despite Kubo going out of his way to show us that the other visors like Shinji and Hiyori were all perfectly capable of shooting Zeros. This is why Ichigo is incapable of accessing his true power. Because when you compare how he normally fights to how he fights and the techniques he uses when he's fully holified, there's clearly a lot of things that he should be able to do that he just can't do. And it's because of how closed off his mind is from his holo side. He's incapable of accepting that as part of himself, so he's incapable of manifesting those traits organically. The most he can do is holofy, which is just putting on his mask and getting a stat boost. And all of this happens while Old Man Zangetsu is suppressing Ichigo's true powers, meaning that Ichigo's powers are blocked from both sides. One, from his inability to accept them as a part of himself, and two, from Old Man Zangetsu actively sealing them. And this would be the state of Ichigo's soul until the 1,000-year Blood War arc. When Ichigo goes to the Soul King Palace to have his zanpakuto reforged, he's forced to come to terms with the conflict existing in his soul. It is through this that he's able to finally accept both Old Man Zangetsu and White Zangetsu not just as parts of himself, but as literally himself. This also involves Old Man Zangetsu finally relinquishing his hold on Ichigo's true powers and letting him inherit them. And it's after this that we start to see Ichigo's movesets begin to change. We see that he is now in far more control of his Reiatsu and is capable of shooting off a super small version of a Getsuga Tensho and uses it to deflect an attack. He's also capable of mixing his Hollow and Quincy Reiatsu to shoot off a Getsuga Jujisho, a completely different technique from Getsuga Tensho. And Ichigo goes from not being able to even use a Zero to being able to use the highest class of Zero possible, a Grand Ray Zero, which he then mixes with the Getsuga Tensho, making it even more devastating. And it's unfortunate that we don't see much of this Ichigo, because we know how things go with Kubo's health when he was writing the 1,000-year Blood War. So we're hoping the anime continues to show us what he's capable of. Because it's clear that when it comes to 1,000-year Blood War Ichigo, there was far more that we could have and should have seen. And with that done, let's ask the question again. Why does Ichigo only have Getsuga Tensho for a good chunk of the series? Well, it's depicted quite consistently throughout the story that having a ton of techniques almost always correlates to having a good relationship with your zanpakuto. A relationship that never existed in the case of Ichigo. Think about it. All the milestones of Shinigami power, being Shikai and Bankai, are locked behind being able to interact with your zanpakuto to a certain degree. The one time we see that Ichigo actually needs to learn a new technique, being Mugetsu, Ichigo makes a very massive step in understanding Old Man Zangetsu and White Ichigo. While he does not complete it until the 1,000-year Blood War, this huge step he takes in understanding them is what allows him to unlock the Mugetsu that eventually defeats Aizen. There are other examples actually. When Byakuya returns from the Soul King Palace, he's considerably stronger. He explains that the only reason he's so much stronger is because he re-examined his relationship with Senbon Zakura, which culminates in him learning how to use Ika Senjinka. Renji, in order to unlock his true Bankai, needed to earn the respect of Zabimaru, and it's very likely that Rukia also needed to do same. Shinigami are nothing like the ninjas or the pirates of One Piece and Naruto, who can unlock new techniques by simply training really hard or being really creative. In Bleach, the Shinigami are a walking, talking relationship. That is what these beings are. And it takes the working together of both the Shinigami and their zanpakuto spirit to properly function. This is why it's impossible to just unlock new techniques, because you need to have that relationship. A relationship that did not exist in Ichigo's case until the end of the story. The codependent bond between the Shinigami and their zanpakuto is illustrated throughout the story in multiple ways. When Shunsui needs to use certain techniques, he needs Ohana's consent. When Renji is about to use a certain technique, he needs to warn Zabimaru first. And when Love is about to use another technique, he needs to warn Tengumaru so that they're able to work together in sync. This is why their relationships support their powers. This is why Bankais evolve over the course of time, because they are a relationship. And eventually, with time, for better or for worse, a relationship will grow and a relationship will change. And if a Bankai is the externalization of that relationship, then obviously that Bankai will also change over time. This is why Bankais evolve, meaning that it's extremely likely that the next time we see Ichigo's Bankai, probably in the Hell arc, it's going to look very different from the last time we saw it. And with this in mind, it becomes very clear why it's unfair to compare the worlds of One Piece and Naruto to Bleach, because Bleach functions by a completely different set of rules. Rules that justify why things work the way they do in Bleach. I hope I've been able to answer the question to your satisfaction. Thank you so much for watching the video all the way to the end if you actually made it to this point. I really like it if you'd consider liking and subscribing, or maybe even leaving a comment. Thank you for coming, thank you for watching, see you in the next upload. Bye.